not that is, it is the policy decided by the minister. It is decided by the political executive, which consists of council of ministers. And as I said, when we are trying to discuss with the presidential form, where there are policies are really formulated by the executive, that is the secretaries with the help of the secretaries. Because the secretaries are real technocrats who have the knowledge, who have the expertise, so naturally they are basically involved in policy formulation. But in the parliamentary form, what we understand, because we have also have an executive, the political executive, but is not having that kind of expertise, so more dependent and more, involvement of the permanent executive is being seen. So this is how, and there is a question which has been asked, whether the policies which are to be formulated should be ratified by legislature. In any parliamentary democracy, it is the prerogative of the political executive, because the party which comes to power forms the government, and it is understood that the political executive who formulate the policy has the consent of the legislature. Because in a parliamentary democracy, the party which comes to power, that is the party which has the majority in the legislature, forms the government. So that is what it is, accountable and responsible to the legislature. So it is, it is understood that the executive which forms the government has the what we call the confidence of the house or the majority of the house. So all policies need not be ratified or be endorsed by legislature. Only policies, some legal legislations are required, that goes to the, what we understand, to the legislature.
That means to give effect to the policy.
Yeah, certain enactments are required. It's not that every program needs. So, but the legislature is nothing but the people's assembly. So there will be a discussion and there will be no vote for any, because it's understood that it is the party has the, only the financial aspect, that is the budget, which has to go and which has to be voted out. So this is what I think. So there is some sort of a confusion, which we feel that policy has to be, the duty of the legislature is to formulate policies and give assent to it. No, it is the domain of the executive. Then what is the importance, growing importance of policy, public policy? Because nowadays, because the earlier public policy means it is completely in any democratic setup, it is by the state for the mostly catering to the needs of the state. So where rarely we have policies which are influenced by the external external agencies. But it is not that the external agency do not what you call influence our policy. There are certain, because we get aid and other assistance. So we have to tune certain policies for the you have to accommodate their demands also. But the present, what we understand, I think the policies has more has also the more external pressure than earlier, because earlier we used to get some sort of financial assistance or maybe naturally we have to tune to their demands. But what we lately we see, there has been a policies which are mostly been influenced by because of the globalization or because of liberalization or privatization, because we are in a global world. And what we understand, we live in a global village. So we have to naturally how you balance between the needs of the particular country and how you integrate with the outside, that is the globalization. So in any democratic setup, the policies which comes out naturally should be inclusive. What do you mean by inclusive? See, inclusive, one way of looking at it, that it should cater to the needs of the various sections of the society. And other way inclusive is that when you are trying to formulate the policy, you should also take the concerns and also the involvement of the people. So that is, one way inclusive is, in general inclusive is that your policy should address to the needs and demands of the all sections of the society according to the requirement which you feel is genuine. It's not that everyone demands. That does not mean that it is genuine. So you have to look at it. That is one way is inclusive. The other way inclusive is that, like we say in a normal small organization, we say participative management. What do you mean by participative management? That the workers and the management do involve in decision making, and automatically they become party to it. Automatically it is one way implemented. So what we understand is that in the same manner, in the context, what we understand when you say inclusive, it is more towards that now we feel that there has to be the involvement of the people who are the recipients.
And
So
also
they,
the environment.
yeah, environment. But that is mean that every level the people can be involved. And what is the role of the legislature, which is also, I mean, it is representing the people. So wherever we feel that we can involve, it's not that in a defense policy you cannot have people's involvement, because defense policy is something different which need, I mean, so wherever policies which are really, I mean, having the addressing the people where they can be involved, like you have Gram Sabha, as you said last session, that in Gram Sabha they can decide about their activities or the development which are concerned within the local area, which affects them, where they have the space and scope. So they can decide. It's not that they can decide something about fiscal policy or something about the policy relating to various other aspects of state. So whatever is concerned, so you have to also take into consideration where we can involve the people. So this is also because now we are we are trying to see that, as you said, the information and communication technology. So because of that, there is a lot of awareness, a lot of information, lot of communication, which was not earlier. So you have a lot of information which, that is being provided to people. So the ICT also will help us to, also involve ourselves.
And it helps in planning and decision making. Information systems are there, management information systems are there, decision support systems are there, geographical information systems are there, knowledge bases are there, expert systems are there. So these are various technologies and applications of information and communication technology, and they definitely go to a greater extent in helping the governmental agencies, the administrators, or even the district administration with effective planning, effective policy making.
Yeah, you are very rightly said. See, these are some new trends which are coming up. So there is a fear of the legislatures who feel that their role, which is supposed to represent the people, direct involvement of the people makes them less important.
And dilutes their importance.
So that way there is some sort of, what we understand, the interest, like you have seen one simple example which we have, myself and Dolly has done one project on this residential welfare, which is one way the Delhi government has come up with Bhagidhari system. So you said that, see, we have a habit of criticizing the policy of the government. So why not the people who are recipient, who are the affected party, why not they involve at the policy level as well as the implementation level? So government is now finding number of ways, alternatives, where we can involve directly the recipients, so that they can also come out with some constructive, they can also be involved in policy formulation and also in implementation.
They can appreciate the problems of the government as well.
Because you always keep on demanding and feeling that the government is doing nothing. But once you involve the process, you also come across the difficulties, and you also will be party to it, and you will also lessen the burden of the government. So that is what is the Bhagidhari scheme, where the Residential Welfare Association, one way, have been integrated in the
delivery of the civic services by the government.
Whether it's a gel board or power, or whether it is a sanitation or what we understand. So that way there has been a lot of awareness among the people about the various, how they have been, and one way they have lessened the burden of the government, and that way they try to integrate themselves, and plus the government can concentrate more important
They are also involved not only in delivery, but also in the monitoring and reporting part also. The like people are involved, the resident welfare, RWAs. So there is where, the real policy implementation, monitoring, evaluation is taking place.
And your study also sees that the involvement of the political representatives, there was no direct, they also been invited, but there was, mostly they feel that it is something threat to their leadership, threat to their, so that way now the question is arising.
But now slowly that threat or reluctance on the part or inertia on the part of the politicians is also getting eroded. Now they are understanding, yes, people take up the cudgels and they try to do the things effectively also.
So that, I think, the new trends are coming up. So not only involvement of the communities, but there are certain areas where the people are ready to pay. So in that context, why the government should involve itself and allocate more and more money. So that way, I think we have a lot of coming up, like at the operational level, whether it's laying of highways, laying of, expressway.
Or for that matter, garbage disposal, what Dr. Nandini had narrated.
So, now the government can also lessen its burden from the administrative point of view and financial point of view, and that way more involvement and more it leads to not only, that also leads to a lot of efficiency. I think this is what we are trying to understand briefly about the general importance of public policy and also the various new trends which are coming up in the formulation and implement of the policies. Now, I request Dolly Matthews to discuss on some of the models of public policy.
What basically we have understood so far by what Dr. Nandini and Professor Vayunandan has been discussing on the various aspects of the policies, the policy making process as such in toto, it involves the formulation, the implementation, monitoring, evaluation, etc., etc. These are certain vital aspects of the entire policy-making process, very well narrated by ways of case studies by Nandini. And really it has been a very heartening to know about such incidents and events or such kinds of studies being in fact taken up with the involvement of the community, where the community in fact has a greater responsibility of fulfilling or of achieving the objectives for which a policy is laid down for their own benefit. Now we in fact see that there are what we said about the vital aspects of a policy. Another vital aspect based on the policy is on which all these aspects rest upon. That is a policy framework. We talk about evaluation, we talk about formulation, we talk about implementation, we talk about monitoring, evaluating, re-examining, revising the policy, etc., etc., etc. But all these vital aspects of the policy making process, of the policy cycle, requires a supportive base, a framework, a theoretical construct, which is known as the policy framework, which is the most important aspect in the entire policy making process, because all the aspects or the phases of a policy cycle rest upon this framework, rest upon this theoretical construct, rest upon this supportive base. What exactly was said by my two colleagues over here, that how does a policy emanate? How suddenly the policy maker will come suddenly one day in the morning and say, no, I have to make one policy. It's not so. The policy has to be conceived. So the framework provides how the policy is to be conceived, by organizing the issue areas, by organizing the problems on which the policy has to be conceived, how a policy has to be designed, how the policy has to be formulated on those issue areas which has been organized with the help of a framework. How the policy will be implemented, by whom it will be implemented, even what kind of a monitoring system will be there, what kind of a communication channel will be there across all these phases of the policy cycle, and also what kind of a evaluating system will be there. Whether the evaluation or the feedback one gets from the policy's implementation leads to the revising of that policy or re-examination of the basic facts of the policy on the basis of which it was conceived. So all these aspects from A to Z of the policy cycle, of the policy making process, is based on a supportive framework, on a construct, on a bed on which the entire aspects of the policy cycle will rest upon or will lie on. And this policy framework, in other words, is said to be a model of policy making, the model of policy making process. Now, what is a model? A model is nothing but it is a boundary that is drawn around a reality. So that means that model has to be based on real inferences, on the experiences of the real world. It cannot be taken from the heaven and brought down saying that this thing has to be followed in a policy. It has to come out from the experiences of the earlier policies. And who comes up with the who comes up with the model? The policy analysts, the policy makers. They draw lessons from the experiences of the earlier policies. What bottlenecks they had, what impediments they faced in the implementation, whether the resources were sufficient or they required more resources, manpower or technical, or for that matter any other kind of resources. So all these lessons can be derived or learnt from the earlier policies, and this becomes a background, this becomes a framework, this becomes a basis for shaping future policies, so that when we have future policies, we design and conceive of future policies, we may not repeat the failures which the earlier policies faced, and therefore we can have effective policy making in future, for the future. So model basically are inferences, they are deductions of the experiences of the earlier policies that are drawn by these policy planners, by these policy analysts, by the policy makers, so that they are able to conceive, they are able to draw, they are able to formulate, implement, monitor, evaluate, revise, re-examine the policies for better in future. And here is where we will discuss the models which are in existence in the entire policy making process. There are umpteen models, there are a number of models, but because of the paucity of time, we will be taking a few of them only. To begin with, the first and the foremost is a systems model of policy making, given by David Easton. He is considered to be one of the most important of all the proponents of the systems model in policy making. David Easton, in fact, considers that the entire policy making process is a big system, in which there are a number of other subsystems that constitute this bigger system. He says that this bigger system can be considered as a larger societal system or a larger environmental system. And in this environmental system, in this larger societal system, which he uses interchangeably, he says there are a number of other subsystems that together form this larger environmental or societal system. So what kind of subsystems will be there in this larger environmental system? The subsystems can be a political subsystem, it can be an administrative subsystem, or for that matter it can be a social cultural subsystem, it can be an economic subsystem, a financial subsystem, and likewise so many other subsystems. And these subsystems invariably keep on interacting with each other. They are not independent entities or work in isolation. They interact, and in this process of interacting, one subsystem will interact with the other, or maybe one interacts with all other subsystems that are there in the environmental system, the larger environmental system. And likewise, they not only interact with each other, they also interact with the environment. They keep on responding to the changes that is happening in the environment. For instance, if we say, earlier it was a very traditional way of delivering goods to the people, that is government to the people. But with the coming of globalization, the entire scenario has changed. So what all changes have been coming in the global environment necessarily have to be adopted by the organization within that environment, the subsystems within that environment. They have to respond to the changes that have taken place in the environment, or that are continuously taking place. So the subsystems need to respond to the changes that are taking place in the environment, and in this process of responding, in this process of interacting with each other as well as with the environment, they influence each other, and in turn gets influenced also. So if one subsystem has some need, has some requirement, then it impinges upon the other subsystem to help it out to fulfill that need or demand. So in this system of systems model of policy making, David Easton considers the most important subsystem is the political subsystem, because the onus lies on the political subsystem. The onus lies on the legislature. The onus lies on the executive. The onus lies on various personnel that are managing these institutions, that are working in these institutions, the bureaucrats. The political subsystem, because of these vital components of legislature, executive, bureaucracy, etc., and even for that matter the judiciary, which interprets as well as give directives to the government, political subsystem becomes very vital for all other subsystems to fulfill their demands, to fulfill their needs. And here is where David Easton says that he can, in fact, where he says that the entire environmental subsystems, the subsystems that constitute the environment, where the significant one is the political subsystem, all the other subsystems send inputs. Inputs means the demands, the needs, the requirements to the political subsystem, so that the political subsystem processes those demands and come out with policies to be implemented for the benefits of the respective subsystems. For example, if there is a need for looking into the health of the rural women, and that is an area which really requires some kind of policy, then the health sector or the health subsystem will impress upon or make a claim upon the political subsystem to come out with a respective policy pertaining to the health of women of rural areas. And therefore, the onus lies on the political system to convert that demand of the health sector into a concerned policy, into a respective policy, so that the benefit reaches to the targeted groups. So likewise, the economic subsystem can impinge upon the political system, the political subsystem, to come out with a policy on agriculture, or for that matter, the 5-year plans. All are done by the political subsystem, and therefore here the political subsystem becomes very important in the entire systems model of policy making. Apart from the inputs, apart from having the demands from the other subsystems in the environment, there is also one more component to the input. Apart from demand, there is also a support that is required by the political subsystem from the other subsystems of the environment. Unless and until the other subsystems give the support to the political subsystem cannot fulfill your demands. I want a road in my colony, in my area, but I'm not ready to pay the taxes. No, I have to pay because I need to give resources to the government to come up with infrastructure for my own benefit. I have to abide by the rules, I have to abide by the laws, the regulations that come up, that are brought down by the legislature, gets the approval of the legislature, and I have to abide by it. Otherwise, I may in fact get some kind of a punishment or a penalty which the government is authorized to do, the political subsystem is authorized to do. So the input in fact has not only the demand from the various subsystems going to the political subsystems for policy making, but also the support that is to be given by the subsystems, all other subsystems, to the political subsystems, so that the demands can be met effectually. Who makes these demands into policies? The political subsystem have institutions, as I mentioned, and all of us have mentioned so far, the legislature, the executive, the person like bureaucracy, the judiciary. They all are vital institutions which in fact in the political subsystem which process these demands, that is these inputs, these supports, and come out with policies, that is the policy outputs or the public policies which in fact give effect to the demands that have been generated from the subsystems. And here is where he also put the authoritative value allocations to the policy. What does one mean by authoritative value allocations? Mean that because it comes up with the approval of the legislature, with the executive, as Dr. Vainandan has said about policies which only requires executive to take to formulate them. So when we say it comes from the legislature, it comes from the executive, automatically it gets the constitutional or legal validity. The authority is there in that policy, and therefore it becomes a public policy. It has an authority, it has to be implemented, it has to be obeyed, and everybody will have an access to it. It may not be pertaining to a particular section or catering to a particular interest. It has to be universal, everybody to universally access it. He adds one important point lastly to the entire systems model, is that once the inputs in the form of demand and support goes from the environmental subsystems to the political subsystem churns it, processes it by ways of institutions and persons, and come up with policies to be sent back to the society. But how does the political subsystem come to know whether the policies have been effectual? That is by way of the feedback loop. The feedback comes again from the society, from the various subsystems who have been benefiting from that policy, whether that policy was really benefiting them. Sometimes even this feedback helps the political system, the political subsystem, to know whether the demands were met or whether the new demands and supports have come up, and even it affects the character of the political system. The way the political system now will be operating may be different from the earlier. So it affects somewhere the character of the political system, but feedback, as such David Eason considers, is very important in the sense it provides a very suitable environment for future policy making. The first model is followed by the second model, and that is...
Briefly, can I... see, I think you have rightly said that, see, all the demands which comes to the political system, I think that is been taken in toto, or the political system has a process whether the demands are genuine or not. Yes. That process is also there.
Yes, the process is very much there. All things that is in fact taken may not be taken at a straight jacket. Yeah, the kind of siphoning, the kind of filtering is there.
The system is political system.
Yes, and even the parliament is there.
Yes.
So the parliament, the MPs are there.
Said, yes. The legislature all debate and discuss.
All debate and discuss,
then
and
only
how
transform.
What all policies have to be made are elaborately discussed at the executive level. And much of the data and planning commission does that kind of a work of planning. So it's not something taken straight jacket, but it is all, the policy is always is there with so much of amount of discussion, debate, research. And especially at the planning commission level, where we have advisors and all in respective areas where they collect so much of information and data, and there is where we conceive a plan, a policy is made.
And the second aspect which you said about the feedback, such a feedback by feedback, the political system also knows whether the policies or the whatever the which has come out.
That is why it affects the character of the political system.
Plus also it also allows the political system also reorganize whether we are effective in the process. It's not only the feedback which provides that whether they have received, but it also helps them to reorganize. And
that is why it is said that feedback not only tells what kind of demands have been met, but also it helps them in changing themselves, in reinventing or even examining themselves. So that is what is meant by saying it affects the character of the political system. Right? So that is where feedback is very important component in this entire
system approach is more relevant today?
Yeah, it is. It is relevant because somewhere for certain policies, system model is the best. But there are different models for different kinds of situations, for different kinds of policies, for different kinds of target groups. The second model after the systems model is the institutional model. Why we say it as institutional is because the institutions play a very important role in deciding the policy content. Never a study has been taken where the relationship between the institutions and the policy content or policy making was studied in a systematic fashion. It was never preceded with a systematic inquiry into the kind of relationship the institutions have in policy making. As said earlier by Professor Vayanandan, what gives the authority to a policy to become public? The government's role in its very formulation and implementation, which gives that word public to a policy. So public policy is where the government is involved in every act of making the policy, in implementing the policy, in all aspects of the policy making process. So when the government is involved, when the parliament is involved, when the legislature is involved, when the executive is involved, the judiciary is involved, automatically it has an authority. As I said, it has to be applied everywhere, universally, access to all, without any malice, without any sectional interests, and at the same time, in case it calls for a disobedience, it can be, the government can impose a penalty or a punishment. This relationship of the institutions in policy making has to be studied, and it is this institutional approach to policy making which takes this into cognizance. The institutions, what are the institutions made up of? The governmental institutions. The governmental institutions are made of individuals and groups. But it is just not the individuals and the groups. Their very behavior, their very attitudes go to a greater extent in deciding the policy content. So governmental institutions are nothing but they are a set of behavioral patterns of individuals and groups who work in that institution. So if I am working, and likewise many people of my like-mindedness are working, we will be more motivated, maybe biased towards a particular section and try to do something to benefit that particular section. So governmental institutions having individuals and groups is always affected by the behavioral patterns of various individuals and groups who in fact go in affecting the policy content. The rules are there in institutions, structures, the arrangements they have, the patterns of behavior they have, the structured patterns of behavior they have, all go in affecting the kind of policy that institution comes up with. If I am not interested, the parliament is not interested in coming up with a women's bill, it's because the individuals and the groups in it do not want that. So the structured pattern of the various groups constituting or consisting of these institutions or constituting these institutions definitely have an impinging on the kind of policy that is going to come up, with benefiting certain sections or withholding that benefit from the other sections. Sometimes the governmental institutions are so structured, they are so arranged that they may facilitate a particular or a certain policy outcome. Again benefiting maybe some minority group or benefiting some other kind of religious group or a communal group or the elite, not the downtrodden. So the effect of these behavioral patterns who form these institutions, the personnel, the people, the rules, the structure of these institutions definitely decide the policy content. So, in all these governmental institutions, the rules and the arrangements may not be so neutral or unbiased. They may be always having a bias in it. And these are the effects of the behavior of the people who are there in these institutions. But a systematic study of the relationship between the institutional effect on the policy content or the policy outcome has not been taken up. And there is where this model of institutional relationship to a policy making has not taken up so much of a grounding in policy making. Following the institutional approach is a rational model of policy making. Here is where we take note of the rationality in policy making. Basically, when we say that a policy has to be effective, a policy has to be efficient, it has to be effectual, then in that case we mean this model says that the policy has to be rational. For that matter, Thomas Dye says that what exactly is policy making is a choice of from the possible available alternatives on rational grounds, so that there is the net value achievement. You are choosing a policy which is the one best option. So the one best option which provides for net value achievement, which is decided, we pick up the alternative that is the best option available, that is based on rational grounds, on logical judgments. We pick up the best option, the best policy alternative, and that is the rational policy making model. That is among the all available policy alternatives, what we handpick is the one best option that is there based on rational judgment. Thomas Dye, in his a book that he came up in 1980s, that was Understanding Public Policy, he says that a policy is rational when it is most efficient. So he equates efficiency as well as rationality. That is to say that the ratio between, he says, how do we in fact say the policy is efficient or the policy is rational? When he says that the ratio between the value of achievement is higher than the value of sacrifice a policy alternative provides for. Say for instance, it achieves more, it achieves positively, and the sacrifices it makes to get this achievement is lesser, and the achievement is more, then the policy becomes efficient. It is a rational policy, and therefore the policy makers always has to judge on these grounds that the ratio between the value of achievement and the sacrifice is higher and positive. And there is where he handpicks the best available option of policy alternative that is there. The number of policy alternatives, he handpicks the best one. And therefore, in order to make a rational policy, the policy maker has first and foremost has to identify and determine the goals. And then once he comes out with the goals, he has to prioritize these goals on the basis of importance to the society, importance to the various subsystems of the society. He rank orders them in order of priority. And then he will try to identify possible policy alternatives so that these goals in order of priority can be achieved. And he does the cost-benefit analysis of each and every policy alternative so that he comes across the best available, the best option, the best policy alternative to match the goals for which his organization is working. And therefore the policy maker will try to understand the value preferences of the society. What I need, he comes to the society, he generates the value preferences, the demands of the society, and he rank orders them by giving them desirable weightage. And on the basis of this desirable weightage he gives to the society's value preferences, he rank orders the goals and objectives to fulfill these value preferences of the society. And then he will study all the available policy alternatives, and he will even try to compare the consequences, the implications of each and every policy alternative available, and even he will try to calculate the ratio between the value achieved and the sacrifices a policy makes is higher or not. And on this basis, then he will handpick the efficient, he will select the efficient policy alternative that can match or that can help in achieving the goals which will help in achieving the value preferences of a society. And there is where this rational policy making model of public policy, policy making is based on the concept that the policy will be very efficient if it is based on these kinds of rational steps being followed by a policy maker. But here is where a contention comes from Herbert Simon. Initially, Herbert Simon, who has written a very important book on administrative behavior, was of the view that all policymakers have to be very rational in their making a choice of policies or making policies. They have to be very rational in their thinking and in the handpicking of the alternatives, policy alternatives. But later he himself said that the administrators, the policymakers, the analysts cannot be that rational because they are incapacitated because of the human nature, the human behavior, the emotional capacities they have, the cognitive differences they will have. We are not computers, so we cannot be based on that mathematical precision or computational ability. We are not machines. We are human beings. We are always affected by our own nature and our own behavior, which cannot be predicted. So what Herbert Simon says, that we cannot make rational decisions, rather something lesser than rational, that can be a bounded rationality or a limited rationality, where the cognitive and emotional capacities are also taken into consideration, or for that matter, the next model which we will be discussing takes up the extra rational dimensions also in policy making, which is other than the rational aspects in policy making. And therefore, the policy makers may not always be optimizing decisions, but they will not be always going for optimizing decisions, but they will be having a satisfying approach towards making policies. That is, they will be very well contented with a good decision which may be lesser than a rational one, because it will be a good decision in the sense it will have well-defined policy goals, and there will be a necessary authority to coordinate the action to give effect to these goals. So therefore, they will be well contented with a good decision which will be lesser than what is a rational decision making, because what Herbert Simon says is that policymakers may not go in for that perfect level of studying all the policy alternatives and coming out to the one best option, because the one best option is never available. And because of incapacitated, because of certain human nature and behavior, the policymakers will be falling short of that rational level, but will be very well satisfied with the less rational or good decisions that they will be really taking. Then we come to the one more significant model in policy making is that of incremental approach given by Charles Lindblom. He comes up with a very wonderful work in 1959, and that is the science of muddling through. He says that nothing can be purely rational. Why? Because nobody has that time. Nobody has the intelligence. Nobody is a computer to come out with effective or one best option, to come out with a policy alternative that will be giving effect to the needs of the society. And also he says that what the purely rationalist thinkers or scholars in fact think of starting from the roots, that is, anytime a fresh policy is required, you have to again go to the roots and dig and come out with a new policy. He doesn't go by this theory. He says that instead of going to the roots again, we can have successive limited comparisons. That is, we can, instead of going to the roots of the tree to start afresh with any policy, we can start very well and continue from the branches itself. So that what Charles Lindblom mean is that we can in fact make continuous comparisons of the existing policy, and what all problems are there in the present policy can be rectified time to time and step by step, and the same policy can continue with modifications, with revisions and with alterations. So we need not go and bring a new policy. Same policy can be continued, so we can build out of that continuity, build out of that situation, and with alterations, rectifications, with improvement measures, we can cover those gaps in the policy and we can let that policy move along and give effect to the objectives for which it has been made. So Charles Lindblom approach of incrementalism says that instead of going back to the roots, coming with a new policy, the existing ones with changes, alterations, rectification can be continued from there itself instead of starting afresh or again starting ground up or having fundamentals anew. So these are certain models which we have discussed. Because of the paucity of time, we are not able to take the remaining ones. Hopefully we'll take it up in the ensuing sessions next month. And for time being, I think our learners would have definitely benefited by today's discussions on the various aspects of policy and policy models, and hope we get some kind of a response from them next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolly. I think you have very detailedly talked about the various models of the public policy, starting with the systems model of the I mean, you talked about system, about the David Easton, that entire society is a system. Within that you have various subsystems. So one of the very important subsystem is the political subsystem, where you try to say that all the demands and needs are being taken over by this subsystem and try to translate because it has its own institutions like legislature and other things which try to look at, debate and discuss and come out. And the other model which you talked about, the institutional model, I think that also which had not been relation. So I hope the students had good inputs in regard to the introduction to the public policy. So we hope in the next session we will be morely concentrating on the policy implementation. Thank you.